On today's show, we start our Houston Rockets recap series, taking a look at the individual players on this Rockets roster, their roles moving forward, their impact this past season, their pros, their cons, their best games, their worst moments, all of that and more. And today's episode, we're focusing on John Wall and David Nwaba. We're going to get there in just one moment, coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
With the second pick in the 2021 NBA Draft, the Houston Rockets select Jalen Green.
T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
I'm going to keep working. I'm going to keep getting better every day. I'm going to keep perfecting my craft. And every time I step on that floor, I'm coming.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast, home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian, also host of Locked On NBA Mondays, host of State of the Rockets podcast, as well as founder of ClutchCityControlRoom.com. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets. The season has officially come to an end. It's been over for a minute now, which means we're diving into our player recap series here at Locked On Rockets. Going to take an individual look at the players on the Rockets roster from this past season, their contributions, their roles moving forward, best moments, worst moments, pros, cons, all of that stuff. Today, we're going to be starting with David Nwaba and John Wall. Jackson, why are we starting with David Nwaba and John Wall? Because I want to get them out of the way first, because they're probably some of the lesser exciting players to talk about on the Rockets roster. And throughout some of these, player individual reviews, I've kind of compiled a couple of them, into one episode. And this is the case with David Nwaba and John Wall. It'll also be the case for Usman Garuba and Bruno Fernando, as well as Jae'Sean and Trevelyan Queen, the two G League prospects together, and then the two Rockets big men that didn't get exactly a ton of run throughout the season. Everybody else on the roster will get an individual episode, a deep dive into how they played for the team, their contributions, their best moments, their worst moments, all of that. But for today's show, the focus is going to be kept on David Nwaba, Uncle Dave, and John Wall. How can you focus on John Wall if he didn't play any games? We'll get there in just a moment in segment 2. Let's start with David Nwaba, though. With Uncle Dave, we take a look at him and his role for this Rockets team. And what is his role for this Rockets team? Basically, reserve, third string wing off the bench, essentially, right? Veteran presence, garbage time minutes. Situationally, he was a part of the rotation to start the season, which was a little weird, right? He was ahead of seemingly KJ Martin in the pecking order to start the season. And then as the season kind of wore on, Steven Silas was balancing Daniel House Jr., was balancing David Nwaba, trying to figure out who was going to get minutes on a certain night. And it kind of felt like that was the combo. One of those two guys, House or Nwaba, were essentially at the 9th or 10th man in the rotation. And KJ Martin was the one who got the short end of the stick and basically got forced out of the rotation despite his excellent play to end last season. So that was a bit of a shocker to start the year. Now, what did David Nwaba bring to the table? We know exactly what Uncle Dave brings to the table. He brings hustle. He brings defense. He's a great transition player. However, he does have his drawbacks as a player. He's a bit tunnel visioned at times, a lot, both in transition and in the half court. If he catches the basketball and starts to drive it in, it's probably just going to be a completed drive like that. Not necessarily a completed drive, but he's driving it in, and the passing is, slim chances he's going to kick that ball out to somebody else. He's going to try and finish it right at the rim, absorb contact, get to the free throw line, all of that. And sometimes it works, especially in transition. When David Nwaba gets ahead of steam in transition, he can be a really, really effective transition player. But the passing's not always there. And, of course, the shooting. That's the other drawback to David Nwaba's game. So for the season, David Nwaba shot just 30.6% from behind the arc. That's, a really unfortunate three-point percentage, because very similar to Jae'Sean in some of the different things that they do bring to the table, their defense, their hustle, their tenacity, all of that, the switchability that they have to be able to guard players, 1 through 4, or even situationally 1 through 5 in certain circumstances. It's tough because even though they bring a lot to the table defensively, they have a lot of shortcomings offensively, be it namely the shooting is the biggest concern. And so it makes it really hard to kind of balance that when you have potentially another non-shooter on the floor in a big man like, an Usman Garuba or an Alperen Şengün or somebody who is, more averse to shooting the basketball. And when you pair those two players on the court together, then you get into spacing issues and all of that, which we saw a lot of this past season for the Houston Rockets. But with David Nwaba, what is his role moving forward for the Houston Rockets, right? He didn't have a super prominent role this past season. In fact, he basically got to a point where he was, stuck on the end of the bench and only played situationally in like garbage time minutes after having a bit more of a prominent role earlier in the season. I don't necessarily think he has a fixture in this rotation, right? He's going to be the guy that is around the team, is the veteran presence in the locker room, soaks up some garbage time minutes here or there, but he's on a pretty team-friendly deal. Do I want to see David Nwaba stick around as a Rocket long-term? I could go either way, right? If the Rockets are able to deal David Nwaba for a second-round draft pick or something, get him off the books, it's not like he's taking up a huge chunk of cap space, and they have a team option on his third year of his contract. So he's under contract for next season for $5 million. They have a team option on the final year of his 3-year deal. So effectively, he's an expiring contract this next season. Now, when it comes to David Nwaba and his impact that he's had this past season, I do want to highlight at least one, stellar game from him, because he did have a huge presence in that game on the road against the Atlanta Hawks. The one that the Rockets came back in, and it was a come from behind victory on the road against the Atlanta Hawks. And David Nwaba was a huge part of that win, right? David Nwaba came in off the bench, played, I believe it was 11 straight minutes in the fourth quarter, and like into the third, beginning of the fourth quarter, and was the force that helped turn that game around for the Rockets. His energy, his presence off the bench, the way that he was defending, the way that he was crashing the glass, just the second chance opportunities that he was generating, all of that in that game helped spark the Rockets win. And that was one of the better wins of the season for this Houston Rockets team. So I wanted to give Uncle Dave his flowers here, to shout him out for his impact in that game specifically. But as per his role for this Rockets team moving forward, he's not going to be a fixture of the rotation. It would not shock me to see him dealt in some capacity, just because this Rockets team is getting to a point where they need to start consolidating some of their assets, figuring out who's going to go where, how do they clear up roster space for these next two rookies that they're potentially going to bring in with the number 2 overall pick, not number 2 overall pick, I apologize, with the top 5 pick. I don't know why I just subconsciously manifested the number 2 overall pick again. With the somewhere in the top 5 pick, as well as their number 17 pick by way of the Brooklyn Nets. So at this point, they've got 13, 14 different guys under contract. They're going to have to clean house a little bit, and he's one of the easier contracts to move when it comes to when you're looking at the Houston Rockets roster and what pieces could conceivably be on the way out this offseason. So that's it for the takeaways here on David Nwaba. Great guy, great presence to have on this Rockets team. Doesn't really have a role for this team moving forward. As far as his impact this past season, it kind of waned. He started off as a part of the rotation, got 86 from the rotation. As he probably shouldn't have been a part of the rotation to start the season, honestly, given how well KJ Martin had played. And that's kind of where we find ourselves at right now with David Nwaba. He's basically an insurance policy on the end of the Rockets bench, or a garbage time player at best currently. So with that, coming up, we want to talk about the interesting guy here, and that's John Wall, right? What do the Rockets do with John Wall? How do they handle this situation moving forward? But first, a quick message from our friends over at Prize Picks, because if you're looking for a daily fantasy option for the NBA, then you need to check out the award-winning app Prize Picks. Prize Picks is daily fantasy made easy. You pick 2 to 5 players and an over-under on their projections, and you can win up to 10 times back on any entry. And it's just you versus the projected numbers. Entries can be made in 60 seconds or less. It's that simple. PrizePicks is safe and offers fast withdrawals. You can use the award-winning app on both the App Store and Google Play. And for a limited time, PrizePicks has an exclusive no-brainer of an offer for all of our listeners. Listeners get $50 for free. That's a free $50 if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores just a single point. All you got to do is use promo code NBA. That's right. This is an exclusive offer available for Locked On fans only. Sign up today and use code NBA to get $50 for free if a player in your first PrizePicks entry scores just a single point. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. And another message from our friends over at BetOnline, because when it comes to betting, BetOnline is your number one source for all of your sports betting stats and info. BetOnline has you covered with all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including this year's basketball playoffs and the start of Major League Baseball season. Now, as well as BetOnline, they've got you covered for everything. I mean, they've got all your sports wagering information, playoffs, esports, you name it. They've got it over at BetOnline. And here's the thing that that Rockets fans are going to find really interesting here, because we can take a look at the NBA draft and figure out the numbers right now for Jabari Smith Jr., for Jabari Smith Jr., for Paolo Banchero, and for Chet Holmgren, who's going to go number 1 overall in this year's NBA draft. Right now, they've got Jabari Smith Jr. at plus 170 to go number 1 overall. They've got Chet Holmgren coming in just behind him, plus 185. And then Paolo Banchero bringing it up in the rear, plus 225 to be the number 1 overall pick in this year's NBA draft. So head over to BetOnline to check out all of that action available to you. Check out their website or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action available to you at your fingertips. BetOnline, it's where the game starts. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Quick reminder, in case you missed it, last week we had our exit interview series of episodes with all of the exit interviews from all of the Rockets, or the majority of the Rockets' young core, as well as Stephen Silas and general manager Rafael Stone. Takeaways from their exit interviews, as well as a big question moving forward for each one of those guys. If you want to go check those out, those are everywhere. It's all in the podcast feed. It is loaded up on the YouTube channel. It's kind of weird because there were so many exit interviews. We wound up publishing, I think, 7 episodes last week, plus like the Bill Simmons ridiculousness. And then obviously the episode to close out the season talking about Jalen's 40 piece against the Atlanta Hawks. So there wound up being a ton of episodes last week. And so you may have missed it like in your podcast feed, possibly. If you want to go back and check those out, I had to like space them out. I was doing like one episode like every 12 hours to like squeeze them all in, because I didn't want to like publish one on Saturday and then one on Sunday. Like, I don't know. It was weird to try and figure it out. I just wanted to get them all out there. They're all out there. Go enjoy them if you haven't checked them out yet. Again, all the exit interviews from all the young players, as well as head coach Stephen Silas and general manager Rafael Stone. So let's talk about the curious case of one Jonathan Hildred Wall. So the Rockets are in this position, as I like lean back in my chair away from the microphone. Terrible podcasting technique. So the Rockets are in this interesting position with John Wall, where I don't necessarily think that this season, this past season, the one that they just weathered the storm with John Wall, that was the season where they needed to deal with him being benched, right? They needed to make it past that season. And there was still the slight possibility of dealing John Wall this past year, right? We heard the rumors, there's the reporting that the Rockets did at one point have, a discussion at least on the table with the LA Lakers about a Jonathan Wall. Wow. Whatever, Jonathan Wall, that works. John Wall for Russell Westbrook swap, including that 2027 first round pick from the LA Lakers. But ultimately, the Lakers deciding that they wanted to just ride out the rest of the season with Russell Westbrook. And obviously we see how that panned out for them. So it would not shock me, especially given the state of the LA Lakers franchise right now, if that conversation is revisited this offseason. Because moving Russell Westbrook is not exactly an easy task. There's not exactly a team out there that is going to be chomping at the bit to pick up Russell Westbrook on the final year of his deal, a monstrous deal, very much like John Wall's, on an expiring contract, given the way that he has truly declined in his play. And again, Russell Westbrook does not elevate your team when it comes to playoff aspirations. Maybe there's a team out there. Maybe the Knicks are desperate to make it back to the playoffs. Maybe Charlotte was rumored randomly to want to be interested in picking up Russell Westbrook, which was a super like out of left field one. So maybe there's a team out there that is actually interested in picking up his services and procuring his services. That said, it would not surprise me if the Lakers had to deal that 2027 first round draft pick to make a deal happen for Russell Westbrook. Could the Rockets still be in that discussion with John Wall this upcoming offseason? Possibly. Could the Rockets actually handle like 2 birds, 1 stone and deal John Wall to the Lakers for Russell Westbrook in conjunction with adding potentially a Christian Wood or a Jae'Sean Tate or, a David Nwaba or signing and trading a Dennis Schroeder. Like, I don't know. There's endless amount of possibilities here in the offseason, many more avenues to complete this trade and to try and facilitate a landing spot for John Wall this offseason versus last trade deadline, which is, again, in the middle of the season. It makes it a lot harder because you can't take back more players than you're sending out because you don't have enough roster spots to allocate. There's a lot of different variables at play when you're trying to do a mid-season trade as opposed to an off-season trade. So I wouldn't completely rule out the possibility that John Wall could be on the way out this summer. However, based on a lot of what Rafael Stone said during his exit interview, is that he's, first off, he's confident that there's a market for John Wall, which could just be posturing, but at the same time, maybe there is a bit more of a market for John Wall heading into the final year of his deal, as opposed to having 2 more years left on this monstrous deal of his. And there's kind of 3 avenues here, right? There's maybe the Russell Westbrook for John Wall swap. Yeah, maybe that happens. Maybe there's a disgruntled star out there, right? And something happens this offseason where, there's a team with an early playoff out, or, somebody gets upset at this upcoming trade deadline and John Wall's salary becomes just an expiring contract this next year, right? He's got 1 year left on his deal. If the Rockets go into the season in the same predicament they were last season with John Wall just being on ice, not playing, then there's a legitimate possibility that they could flip John Wall for a disgruntled star or somebody who wants out of their current situation. You package some of the Brooklyn Nets' future assets, or even maybe the Milwaukee pick that the Rockets. I mean, there's a lot of different things that you could do if you're the Houston Rockets, and you package those assets together, send those out with John Wall as the salary filler, and you take back whatever, disgruntled, B tier, A-tier stars upset on the market. That's another avenue, another possible direction that the Rockets could go with John Wall. The last direction, and this is the one that I think, honestly, at this point seems the most possible of the 3. And that's John Wall's going to probably pick up, not probably, he's picking up the final year of his contract option. And the Rockets could very easily negotiate a buyout with him, in the sense of, if there's a team that John can line up, right? If there's a team out there that wants John Wall's services, and they can line up a situation where they say, hey, we're willing to pay you X amount. So here's, 10 million a year, 15 million a year, whatever they're willing to pay him on, after being bought out from his current contract here in Houston. John Wall could easily give back that equivalent amount off of his current deal. Now, maybe it's a multi-year deal thing. Maybe it's like 3 years, 10 million, and he's willing to give back all of that 30 or something. I don't know I don't want to throw any specific numbers out here, but I think at this point, that is probably the most likely outcome for the Rockets and for John Wall, is a team out there that wants to sign him, that wants his services. Maybe like the Miami Heat with potential backup guard spot to Kyle Lowry. Maybe the LA Clippers could be a landing spot for them. They desperately need some type of a facilitator to help get guys set up over there. Even the New Orleans Pelicans could be a really interesting spot for him, possibly, after watching them, kind of fight their way through the play-in, Zion coming back next season, possibly, all these different things to consider for them to make a significant push. And they were already wanting to be in the market for Kyle Lowry this past offseason. They wanted a veteran point guard to kind of help get them over the top and push them towards the playoffs. So maybe John Wall can be that guy at a discounted rate. That said, if John Wall can find a potential suitor after discussing, a potential buyout with the Rockets, he could then give back the exact amount of money that he's going to, receive on his new deal, right? So if he's making 10 million on his new deal, Rockets entertain a buyout with him, they cut down that 10 million, call it a day. Those are kind of the 3 potential avenues for John Wall. And that's why we're talking about those instead of, obviously we don't have, a best game or a worst game to talk about John Wall. I could just be like, John Wall's best game was when he was over there on the sidelines in Miami, showed up to support the Rockets after not being on the bench all season long. That's a real teammate type move. I could, make light of the situation like that. But legitimately, this is kind of the discussion surrounding John Wall, is what does his future hold with this Rockets team? Will the Rockets be able to find a suitor for him this offseason, or will they roll into next season basically under the exact same premise as this year, which is, all right, John, you're not part of the lineup. You're going to sit on ice for the entire season, and we're going to pay you to just sit over there and do nothing. So it'll be really interesting to see what direction the Rockets go. At this point, I'm leaning Now that they have just 1 year left on his deal, I'm leaning the buyout option. And I think that's probably the most reasonable route for them to go and entertain, unless the Lakers just hit absolute panic mode and they're like, we got to get Russell Westbrook out of here. And if they can't find another potential suitor, there's a 1-for-1 match sitting right here in Houston. And then the Rockets would have to entertain buyout discussions with Russell Westbrook, which would be a whole nother thing to have. I mean, that would have to be something that was like constituted well before the trade, which is, all right, we do the trade. Russ, you're getting bought out immediately after the trade. Rockets pick up 2027 first round draft pick and they wash their hands of the situation. And if Rafael Stone picks up a first round draft pick on both ends of the John Wall trade, that would be a masterclass in general managing. But coming up, do want to talk about plans for the show moving forward, some of the offseason dynamics here at play, as well as we got to get to a Tankathon sim. And hey, we're bringing back Fan Talk Friday. So I want to talk about that coming up in just a moment after a quick message from our friends over at rockauto.com. Because with the ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's basically impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts that your car could possibly need. Save time and money when using rockauto.com. Why would you want to spend up to 30, 50, or even 100% more for the exact same parts from a chain store or car dealership? RockAuto.com is a family business. They've been serving do-it-yourselfers online for over 20 years. The prices are always reliably low for every single customer. They don't price gouge you based on being like a DIY person, which is how it should be, right? You shouldn't get charged more just because you know how to do some minor repairs on your car. They've got everything you could need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even brand new carpet. So go explore their easy-to-use website today to find the solution to your auto parts needs. This is a really important part. When you go to rockauto.com and check out, be sure to write "Locked On" in there. How did you hear about us box, so that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Be sure to visit rockauto.com. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. I got a couple more points I actually want to throw in here on the John Wall front before getting to our kind of show dynamics as we navigate the offseason, bringing back Fan Talk Friday, which I'm really excited to do because I love interacting with and talking with Rockets fans. That's one of my favorite parts of being able to do this show. So, and of course, the Tankathon spin, which you got to do at the very, 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 very end. So in fact, I'll actually prep that right now. I don't have that tab pulled up, and that's on me. I apologize. So there it is, Tankathon. Now, so a couple more points here on John Wall. I will say that based on all of the attitudes and the mentality surrounding John Wall from the team, all the young guys are very appreciative of the role he did play, at least to start the season before he moved his workouts to Miami and focused, all of his attention there. When John was with the team, consummate professional, right? Working with the young guys, working with the coaching staff, improving guys, really trying to show them, tips and tricks like, hey, like, notice this, hey, check this out. And so I don't think it can be understated the impact that John has had on this young Rockets team, even though he hasn't been on the floor. When he was around them in the earlier stages of the season, I want to give him some of the credit for trying to help grow and cultivate what the Rockets are doing here moving forward. And it takes a really big person to understand, hey, like, I want to play basketball, obviously. Like, he wants to play. He wants to compete. But the Rockets are clearly not in that position. And it wouldn't help John to be out there competing. It wouldn't help the Rockets for him to be out there competing, because he's not competing for anything. Yeah, you'd be playing games, but you ultimately wouldn't be competing for anything. And then you're also putting your body at risk of injuring yourself again if you're out there competing. Maybe you make the slight argument that if John Wall was actually out there playing games, then there might be a team that's a bit more inclined to trade for him. But I think there's enough of a sample size from last season and the numbers that he did put up, albeit on somewhat bad efficiency, that he's capable of playing high-level basketball still. John Wall could easily help a team, push a team over the top, in fact, when it comes to title aspirations. The difference is, do you want John Wall at $47 million, or you want John Wall at $10 million off of a buyout deal? Like, that's the difference right now. Every single team that's vying for playoff aspirations in the league right now would love to have John Wall on like the MLE or on a $10 million deal or 15 or whatever. They just don't want him on a $47 million deal. It's that simple. So wanted to clear up that point about John Wall, that he has been impactful. You hear about the way that the rookies have talked about him, their impact with him in practices throughout the earlier part of the season before he kind of departed from being a part of what the Rockets were doing, just as far as their like day-to-day operations are concerned. So there's that. And then the last thing here is, again, I do think, and maybe I'm overvaluing, what is essentially a $47 million expiring contract, but the Rockets very clearly have their eyes set on the 2023 offseason. which is where they've got John Wall coming off the books. They've effectively got Eric Gordon coming off the books. They've effectively got Christian Wood, Jae'Sean Tate, KPJ. Like all these guys are going to hit, either come off the books or hit restricted free agency, whatever. They're going to have a ton, like $80-something million to play around with that offseason. I don't know which is more beneficial to the Rockets, basically just holding on to John Wall and letting that $47 million fall off the books and then having all that money to play around with that offseason, or potentially leveraging John Wall's contract, which is effectively an expiring deal, into, again, a disgruntled star somewhere, or potentially taking back a little bit more long-term salary to continue piling on the assets that they want to, kind of stock up in the little asset cupboard that they've got. I don't necessarily think that they would want to take back like egregious long-term salary, like nothing like a 3 or 4 year, like super terrible deal, but maybe they kind of, maybe if there's not a target that they're really interested in the 2023 offseason, and there is some dead money out there that they want to potentially be able to take back some either young talent or draft capital for, then maybe they leverage themselves and they push it back one offseason, right? Maybe they look at the 2024 offseason as the offseason where they want to have all that cap space to play around with. And if you effectively flip John Wall and delay the expiring of that contract by taking back some dead money, some whatever, bad salary from another team, and that salary falls off the books in 2024 instead of 2023, then maybe that's the summer where they want to kind of poise themselves to jump on a big name free agent if there's nobody that they think that they can conceivably pick up in the 2023 offseason. So just food for thought. There's a lot of different pathways that they could go with John Wall and a lot of different exciting opportunities here. But if I had to put money on it, which you could potentially bet online, if I had to put money on it, I would say that John Wall is not going to be a Rocket through the entirety of next season. I don't necessarily feel super confident about him being moved this summer, but I would feel very confident about the fact that he is not going to finish next season as a Houston Rocket to where he just expires and falls off the books and the Rockets go through this old song and dance for an entire second season where 2 months into the season, we're going to have another Chris Mannix article about free John Wall, let him play, all of that mess. So with that, starting this week, in fact, for the show, and just kind of the show's dynamic moving forward, we're shifting a ton of focus towards the draft in the coming, weeks and months as we lead up to the NBA draft. Just like we did last season, we'll be kind of shifting the dynamic, the focus to draft prospect. We've already done a lot of draft content this season, but we'll be, really heavily focused on that. I've got a bunch of different people that I want to bring on to share their insight, their analysis about the NBA draft, lots of draft experts, as well as friends of the Rockets community already. Because draft talk is where we're at when you are the worst team in the association. So plenty of draft content coming your way, as well as we'll be navigating this player recap series started today with David Nwaba and John Wall. We'll be navigating across the Rockets roster intermittently over these next few weeks, next month or so, kind of putting out different player recap episodes. We'll have different guests on to talk about each and every single player, kind of share the ideas about the good, the bad, best games, worst games, all of that stuff. Roles and identity for these players moving forward with this Rockets team. So we're going to do all that. And then what I want to do is every other Friday, I'm going to be doing Fan Talk Friday. So we did this a little bit last season. I tried to bring it back as a Twitter Spaces thing earlier this season and played around with that for a little bit. But ultimately, I want to do it here on the show because I think that's what is the most important thing, is getting, kind of elevating some fans in the community, sharing their thoughts, their feelings about the team. So if you would like to be a part of Fan Talk Friday here at Locked on Rockets, comment on the YouTube page, comment, on Twitter, DM me, comment under the show link that I tweet out whenever we do one of the shows, all of that. Give me the topic that you want to talk about. So this is how we're going to do this. Last time we did this, I just picked 3 people at random and I just ran with it. And it was that, and we did like a whole show. This time around, it's going to be a one-on-one with me for about 10 to 15 minutes. And so I'm going to compile 3 one-on-ones into like a full-length show. So again, comment on the YouTube page, DM me, put it on Twitter, whatever, at me, all that stuff about the topic that you would like to talk about. And I'll pick my 3 favorites, the 3 most interesting topics that I think would be fun to have a little back and forth about. And you'll come on the show. Well, you need to be able to record sometime Thursday afternoon, evening, or sometime during the day Thursday if you can do during the day. So basically, you got to be available sometime Thursday, let's make sure I got the date right. You got to be available sometime Thursday the 21st, pretty much anytime throughout the day or evening. Figure out a time, we'll sit down, we'll talk, we'll record. It'll be a ton of fun. And again, I love interacting with Rockets fans. Like, that's one of my favorite parts about this job, about being in this role, is interacting with so many amazing Rockets fans. So this is an opportunity to continue to do that, bringing back Fan Talk Friday. We'll do it every other week as we navigate the offseason. And hey, if it's popular enough, then maybe we'll keep it going as we go into the regular season this next go around, depending on how the offseason goes with it. But again, if you want to take part in Fan Talk Friday, DM me, comment on the YouTube page what you want to talk about, all that stuff, and we'll get that figured out. We'll get it sorted. But last thing here before we shut down the show for today is our Tankathon sim, because we have 28 days, 5 hours, and 24 minutes. I shouldn't put the minutes in there. We got 28 days and 5 hours until the NBA draft lottery takes place, and we find out where the Rockets are going to be picking in this year's NBA draft. So with that, let's sim this lottery, see where the Rockets land. Ooh, okay. Number 2 overall pick, Washington lands at number 1. They jump up 9 spots to number 1. Sacramento jumps up 4 spots to number 3. OKC is at number 4. And Orlando falls down to number 5. Brutal for the Orlando Magic. Great for the Rockets, though, being in the number 2 spot. Again, I somehow accidentally manifested number 2 earlier this episode, so I guess that worked. Anyways, let's go ahead. Washington at number 1 overall. I feel like they need some size, like legitimately. Any one of the top picks could be great in Washington. I would probably lean Chet Holmgren at number 1 if Washington is there, which leaves the Rockets at number 2 and a clear choice between Paolo Banchero or Jabari Smith. I'm still in the Jabari Smith camp, so I'm going to run Jabari Smith here at number 2 for the Houston Rockets. Who would you pick at number 2 if the Rockets fell at number 2 and Chet Holmgren went number 1 overall? Let me know in the YouTube comments. I do read each and every one of those every single day. But as always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, be sure to check it out on Apple, Spotify, Google, the Odyssey app, free and available on all platforms. Also, be sure to check out the show on the YouTube channel. Like I just said, go to YouTube, search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. How do you feel about John Wall's role moving forward? How do you feel about David Nwaba and whether or not he's actually going to be a long-term part of this team? Not really a major fixture. Let me know in the comments. And again, who would you pick with the number 2 overall pick if Chet Holmgren is off the board? Let me know in the YouTube comments. As always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.